Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here today. We are going to talk about the fruitful endeavor of taking on a plant-based diet and what it can mean for you. Before I begin, can I just see a show of hands? How many people in here are vegan currently? Okay, how many people are dipping their toe in that water, maybe vegetarianism? How many people are like, no way am I going that route? I'm just here for the free coffee. Do we have free coffee? Is there coffee today? Free food, oh yeah, free food. Okay, so I too tried to pack a tremendous amount of information into this lecture for the sake of giving you guys a little bit about history of how we came to be one of the richest, most technologically advanced, and also sickest countries in the world. I have a bunch of research in here that I'm gonna kind of reference to show you how a plant-based diet can reverse one of the most diabolical diseases to poke its head out in the last 100 years, which is diabetes. And then I'm going to give you guys some quick suggestions that can help you kind of start your path to a better, healthier life. And as John was saying, taking on a plant-based diet is not only going to extend your life, but it's going to give you a better quality of life. From a lot of the patients that I had worked with during my training, once you get into a later stage of diabetes and you have to get things like dialysis, or you have to get limbs removed because you have diabetic foot and vascular diseases. It's a horrible, horrible way to live out the rest of your days, but it can be reversed, and you can stop it through the proper eating. So, let's start with the elephant in the room. I'm a vegan, that dreaded V word that has a whole bunch of negative connotations associated with it. I started this journey roughly 1999. And during that time, when I first said I'm going to become a vegan, I'm going to stop eating meat, I'm going to stop eating cheese, stop eating everything that we eat in a Western diet, my parents looked at me and they were confused. Most people were confused and said, what's a vegan? Then when I explained that to my parents and my friends are Sicilian, then I went through the disowning phase, where no Sicilian can be a vegan and something must be wrong with me. It happened. And then when I started to get ill, which became less and less and less when I went on a plant-based diet, my parents would look at me and they say, oh, well, you're sick because you're not eating meat. You're cold because you're not eating meat. You gotta eat more meat. And I didn't listen to them. And then as time went on, my friends stopped inviting me over to the barbecues because they're like, that's the weird guy who doesn't eat meat, and he sits there with a piece of bread and some condiments, and that's his sandwich during the cookouts. So we fast forward to 2010, when I started my training at the University of Illinois in metabolism, biomedical research, and diabetes. And I was very excited to be there. I had gone in with a master's degree, and I was like, okay, this is gonna be an intense 7 years, and I'm gonna get to work with people that get it. They understand why I would be on a plant-based diet and why I would choose this path. And I met my classmates, I met my lab mates, and I told them I was a vegan, and guess what? I got the same responses. They'd say, you're what? What's that? They didn't disown me. But as my training went on, and we got into later years, I would get text messages from them with these type of attachments. When you see a vegan choking, kill the weakest link. All right, years went on, I would get things that would say this on emails. I'm a level 5 vegan. I don't eat anything with a shadow. Years went on in med school. I would get vegetarian, the Sioux word for poor hunter. All these attachments were coming with me all the time. 2015, oops, let me go back. When I would meet them in the weight room, they would say, you better put on a meat suit if you want to put up the heavy weight. And then something bizarre started happening right around 2017. And that's when they started saying, hey, tell us a little more about this, because now that we're educated, and now that we've gone through this metabolic training, we get it. So, in spite of their second grade humor that I had to deal with for about 7 years, currently now, my colleagues, my classmates, my friends, and even my parents are starting to understand a couple of things. One, we are in the fight of our lives for our lives, okay? Because of the food that we're eating. Two, the Western diet is the major contributor of chronic disease. And three, all jokes aside, the food that we are eating is getting the last laugh because it's killing us and it's killing our children. Okay? So science is finally starting to catch up to what the food industry has been doing to us for a lifetime. And now the scientists that are doing research in this area are starting to understand that we better put the brakes on the food industry because we're plummeting into everyone having some type of chronic disease. So, how we become so sick? We're going to talk a little bit about the history, which is the why, and we're going to start our story in Japan. Okay? So, prior to 1960 in Japan, the country was basically a blank slate when it came to cultural influences. Okay? So if we look at 1960 food in Japan, we had foods that were filled with whole grains, foods that were filled with tofu, complex carbohydrates, and other dishes that had a variety of vegetables, a variety of whole grains, and some fish, right? That was the staple protein in the Japanese diet. From 1940 to 1960, the prevalence of type 2 diabetes was about 1 to 3% in people over the age of 40, which is remarkable because once we start to get older, our metabolism starts to slow down a little bit. We start to see that diabetic indicators start showing up a little more frequently, but still, 1 to 3% is remarkable. Okay? Something remarkable then happened in 1970. What do you guys think that was? Oh, we're good. The American diet started making its way over to Japan. We started seeing Western influence. Okay, so what happened? What do you think happened as a result? Oh, yeah, John, I'm starting to see now what you're talking about. Okay. So there were major changes in the way they ate. So we can see right around 1965, you guys see that little dot there? We started seeing a massive increase in fat consumption. So the Japanese culture before 1960 was roughly at about 10 grams per day. And then once we got to 1994, we're at about 50 grams per day. Okay? Now at the same time, with the Western diet influences, we see that complex carbohydrates started decreasing. We see that in 1955, they were eating about 400 grams of carbohydrates a day, right? But I thought carbohydrates were bad, right? That's what they tell us here. We see that in right around 1960 again, we start to see a plummet. And we go from 400 to roughly 280. Okay? Increase in fat, decrease in plants, decrease in grains, decrease in complex carbohydrates. Then what happened? Well, that 1 to 3% that we saw from 1940 to 1960 then changed to 12 to 15% in 1980. So with the change of the diet, we saw a change in the pathogenesis of disease. Okay? And in 1980, it didn't get much better. We could look from 1976 to 2006, look at the rate of obesity in Japan. I'm gonna put a line of best fit so you guys can see it a little better. Skyrockets, okay, specifically in men. So, why this change? What had happened? So, if Japan was a blank slate around 1960, what was happening in America at the same time? Well, basically a lot of the same. We can see that in around 1960, I'll draw a line there, we can see that the consumption of meat went from about 100 pounds a year to 200 pounds a year. Chicken, same story. About 10 pounds a year to about 57 pounds a year. Okay? Same time, 1960, same thing we saw in Japan. Cheese, same thing, 1960, point of no return. We start to get increasing cheese consumption from 8.3 pounds per year to 33.5 pounds per year. Massive spikes in intake of animal products. And now we're at a place where we can have a 4x4 from In-N-Out with animal style fries. We've made it. All right, so this is the common diet now. So what is the common thread between Japan and America? These guys, plain and simple. It's the only thing that has changed in our food production starting around 1960, okay? And now, as a result of the food production, as a result of the trends in our eating, by the time we are age 40, the average American will have had 15 cows, 12 hogs, 900 chickens, and 12 sheep. Sheep aren't popular. People don't eat a lot of sheep here. Most importantly, we will also have had about 1,000 pounds of assorted animal products, such as hot dogs and lunch meat and things like that. Okay? So, how has all this become possible? What had happened around 1955 and 1960 that has put us on this train to destruction, metabolic destruction? Well, it was this thing called the Green Revolution. Have you guys ever heard of that? Anybody ever heard of the Green Revolution? It's a very odd name for what had happened, because basically what had happened in this country is we started changing the way technology is applied to agriculture and farming, okay? So what we did basically is we took the designs from World War II tanks and we started making better tractors, okay? Not very green. We started taking chemicals that we used from World War II and World War I and we turned that into fertilizer, right? And these technological advances that were considered green changed the way we farm. So we went from this type of farming around 1950 to this type of farming, right? That's how our chicken is produced now, to this type of farming, okay? That's our pork, to this type of farming, okay? Why are the workers wearing masks? Because many of the diseases, viruses, and bacteria that we have to get vaccinated from come from animals. So they have to be cautious of airborne viruses, airborne bacteria, okay? This type of farming, all right? So the Green Revolution allowed us to get to this point. Not very green. Shortly after, the marketing got involved. You guys remember all the commercials from the late 70s, early 80s? See if I can jog your memories. Okay, the battle for our dollar began. And we can see that, you guys remember that commercial? The beef industry started competing for your dollar. And then the pork industry started competing for your dollar. You guys remember these commercials? I remember them. The Incredible Edible Egg, they started competing for your dollar, okay? This one cracks me up. Milk's coming. This one, the Super Healthy Cookbook, right? And you're looking at a cheeseburger filled with saturated fat. You're looking at a slice of cheese filled with saturated fat, high levels of cholesterol. And you're looking at ketchup that has high fructose corn syrup in there, right? And that's the superhero cookbook. And then lastly, milk, it does a body good, right? So following this Green Revolution, we then had the marketers competing for your dollar, okay? And what about plants? You guys remember any commercials with plants? Now, they were there. They were there. So let's see, and I had a hard time finding these, but they were there. That wasn't it. Oh, I forgot about this one. McDonald's was also competing for the dollar as well. So more than 55% of your protein needs, and this cracks me up here. Look at what I highlighted. And a higher level of many vitamins and minerals than the average Australian meal. Wow, thanks McDonald's. We appreciate it. All right, so then the plants, they were there, but they had kind of a different tone to them. So look at that one. Doesn't look very appetizing, right? And if you are gonna eat a salad, if you are gonna eat healthy food, then make sure you guys put fried bacon bits on there, right? Makes it taste better. And even McDonald's threw their hat into this arena. And they said, hey, look what we made. We made this new McDLT. And they were focusing on keeping the lettuce and the tomatoes and the onions fresh and crisp, all right? So they tried to work around it and get more money for the people that were trying to be a little more health conscious. Okay, so did the Green Revolution and the marketing efforts have an impact on the American diet? Absolutely, and I pulled up some data to show you guys some of the changes from the 60s to the current date. So We are going to first look at meat, poultry, fish trends in consumption and meat intake. And keep in mind, I put this up here, there's a marketing war that's happening, and I put the red highlights as bad and the green highlights as good. So let's look at beef. Oh, my goodness, that is just, okay. 1965, beef consumption per capita went from 69.5 pounds, 1985 up to 74.6 pounds, okay? And red meat's always been bad, right? Oh, don't eat a lot of red meat. So we highlight that in red. What about chicken? Chicken's the healthy meat, right? Yeah, right, eat more chicken. So chicken went from 1965 to 23.1 pounds per capita to 39.7 pounds per capita. So almost doubled. Okay, so the marketing of chicken was working. We were buying a lot more chicken. And what about turkey? Well, turkey's only popular around Thanksgiving, right? But we can still see from 5.8 pounds to 9.4 pounds, big increase in turkey consumption. Okay, probably through lunch meat too. A lot of people eat turkey lunch meat. And then lastly, fish. Fish went up a little bit, 10.8 pounds to roughly 14.5 pounds. So does it look like the good meats are winning or the bad meats are winning? No, well, remember the good meats are the green, right? So it looks like the good meats are kind of selling out a little more than the bad meats, all right? So let's look at trends in milk products and eggs, okay? 1965, 236 gallons of milk reduced down to 116.5. So there's a reduction in whole milk, okay? What about low-fat milk? 10.9 gallons to 85 gallons, right? So the marketing for milk, the low-fat milk, it was working. We started drinking more milk, right? We got away from the whole milk. We started drinking more of the low-fat milk. But in honesty, whole milk is about 50% fat, right? What is low-fat milk? 35%, right? So not much difference, but they market it as low-fat milk. Okay, then we get into skim milk. Nobody really ever drank a lot of skim milk, so we can see that skim milk sales kind of plummeted a little bit. Butter went from 9.6 to 22.4 per capita. We started eating a lot more butter, okay? And then I skip over to eggs. Look at eggs. 313 up to, I'm sorry, was that 3? I'm having a hard time seeing that. About 254.6, so slight decrease in eggs. Okay, so what does all this mean? We made agriculture easier to grow food, to create farms, factory farms where we can produce more meat. And the marketing campaign said, eat these things, they're much healthier for us. And we did it, okay? So then I have a question for you guys. If that's the case, and these things are good for us, and we are eating what we're being told to eat by the industry and by the FDA and the government, then why is it that the good meats, right, the turkey, the chicken, the fish, the skim milk, those all went up, right? Why is it that the indices of diabetes from 1958 to 1988 has gone from 1.58 million to 6.16 million? How do we explain that? What's that? Okay, let's talk a little bit. I like that. Let's talk a little bit about diagnosis because we're going to get into that. So if we look at the trends from 1967 to 2015, we can see that diabetes is just skyrocketing, both obesity and the detection of diabetes. And we see that from 1967 to 1988. That kind of seems to be the time frame when this started really picking up and getting a lot of momentum. Okay, so it was a very real threat. And one thing about the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes is it's a very slow burn, okay? Diabetes is not a disease where it's a simple on-off condition, right? Where one day you go to sleep without diabetes and the next morning you wake up with it, right? It doesn't happen that way. The development of type 2 diabetes, it happens over the course of a continuum, okay? And that continuum can take anywhere from 15 to 20 years to completely develop, because during that continuum, you experience different types of metabolic derangement. Okay, so you can start with being a lean individual, which has a normal glucose tolerance, start to gain a little bit of weight. Once we start to gain a little bit of weight and move into an obese state, we can still maintain our glucose tolerance because our beta cells are spitting out a lot more insulin to try to compensate for small amounts of insulin resistance in metabolic tissue. As we further go into the continuum, we start to get obese with impaired glucose tolerance, and that means that the insulin can't do its job anymore. And even though the insulin is spitting out a lot, or the beta cells are spitting out a lot more insulin, we're still developing greater resistance to it at metabolic tissue. And then we move into these later stages of diabetes, which is the orange and the red, and that's basically where we have beta cell failure. And then the beta cells, so when the beta cells start to perish, they go through something called hypertrophy, where they start to grow in size. And as they start to grow, you start to have inflammatory responses in the beta cells. You start to develop free radicals in the beta cells, because it's a condition that shouldn't be there. The beta cells shouldn't be growing like that. And then once the beta cells fail, that's it. You're on insulin for the rest of your life, okay? But it is reversible. If we can avoid getting into these later stages here, the orange and the red, we can reverse that, okay? So between 1960 and 1980, we started seeing diabetes poking its head out, okay? Which was about 10 to 15 years after the Green Revolution started. So why is diabetes so hard to detect? Why is it a slow burn? Why does it take 15 to 20 years to realize what's going on? Because diabetes is a disorder that impacts every tissue in your body. And that's why it's very complicated to detect it and figure out what stage that you're in. So we know that as we start to get a little bigger on our waistline, we start to become more insulin resistant, okay? With the insulin resistance, we have alterations in gut bacteria, and our microbiome starts to change. So we have cells in our gut called L and K cells, and they secrete something called incretins. And incretins basically communicate with your pancreas, and they tell your beta cells to secrete insulin. So they start to fail. You start to get changes in your adipose tissue. So your adipose tissue it's an endocrine organ. It sends out signals, it receives signals. We start to get changes in adipokines and cytokine signaling in adipose tissue, okay? We start to run into problems with vascular inflammation, which you see in the center here, where we start to get microvascular complications because endothelial cells in the microvascular system don't have protection from glucose. So the higher the glucose goes up, the more destruction to those cells occurs. We start to see changes in our liver and in our pancreas, in our skeletal muscle, because insulin, it signals the liver and skeletal muscle differently. So when insulin is secreted into the blood, it tells the liver, it says, hey, stop pushing out glucose. So it turns off the liver from putting glucose into the blood. When insulin signals skeletal muscle, it says, hey, send up these transporters and bring glucose into the skeleton muscle, okay? So that starts to change. And then as John had said, we start to run into issues with our neurons. We start to run into issues with our kidney. We start to run into issues with our heart, okay? So it impacts everything, and it does it at different stages. Bless you. So how do we reverse this metabolic derangement? How can we stop this from happening? It's a very easy solution. So now we're going to talk about the how. So I want all of you guys to say this with me right now. I need some crowd participation. I need you to say, go ATG. A little louder. Go ATG. Go ATG. All right. And that means go against the grain. Okay? Now, unless you're talking about like sprouted wheat grain, that's okay. You can eat that. All right? Go against the grain means you gotta stop listening to the commercials. You gotta stop listening to what you read in Men's Health magazine. You gotta stop listening to advertisements that you see in magazines. You gotta stop listening to fad diets. These things are there to make money. That's all they're there for, okay? And by them making money, they're destroying you. And that's what you need to understand. So, do you wanna go with the flow and continue to develop diabetes and metabolic syndrome and chronic disorders? Or do you wanna go against the grain and never have to worry about that? Choice is simple, if you ask me. So let's see how going ATG changes things, all right? Look at my man here. He's looking the other direction. He's going against the grain, okay? So we're gonna look at a couple of studies now, okay? So there was some research that was conducted within this very church, not this church here, but the organization, where they looked at roughly almost 61,000 participants. And they basically did a bunch of biomarkers to see how healthy individuals were that were vegetarian, vegan, and just standard dieters, okay? And they found something really remarkable, okay? This was without any lifestyle modification or any intervention whatsoever. When they looked at body mass index, they saw that vegans had substantially lower body mass index than non-vegetarians. All right, so without any intervention, vegans weigh less, or they have more muscle mass and less non-muscle mass, okay? When they looked at the prevalence of type 2 diabetes, they saw the same thing. Vegans were substantially lower with the prevalence of type 2 diabetes than non-vegetarians. But you can see that in between, other variations of vegetarians were slightly lower than the non-vegetarians, okay? So there's something to this, to not eating these meat products, not eating these animal products, not eating cheese, not eating eggs, okay? Another study that was conducted in 36 subjects, all in late stages diabetes, showed us that when they separated these people into 18 groups of a vegan diet and 18 individuals into a standard isocaloric diet, they basically had a couple of rules. The vegans were not allowed to have any animal products. They were supposed to minimize their oil and no exercise for 14 weeks, all right? So the menu that the vegan individuals were allowed to eat is a sample of it right here. Blueberry pancakes, oatmeal with cinnamons and raisins, cantaloupe, rye, vegetable chili, salad, banana, lentils. Seems to be a lot of carbohydrates there, doesn't there? Complex carbohydrates, right? I thought they were bad, right? Don't eat carbohydrates, that's what they tell us. Every cell in your body is designed for glucose dismantlement. That's why you have glycolysis. That's why you have anaerobic glycolysis. That's why you have aerobic glycolysis. That's why your body stores glycogen. That's why it secretes glycogen, okay? Sugar is not the enemy. Too much of it is, absolutely. So they did this for 14 weeks, and what they saw with the results were that the vegan subjects lost about 13 pounds, mean average of 13 pounds in 14 weeks, 3 inches off their waist, significantly increased glucose sensitivity at skeletal muscle, which means they became less insulin resistant. So that shows you right there that you can reverse diabetes with a plant-based diet by omitting the fat, by omitting the cholesterol, by omitting the cheese. Evidence right there that insulin resistance can be reversed, okay? Another study looking at late-stage diabetics as well. 57 subjects. Again, they were divided into 24 vegan, 33 non-vegan isocaloric diet. And what's interesting is since there's 33, they should have a lot more power, right? So that their results should overpower the vegan results because they have more people in their group. And what they saw, what the vegans had to do was they had to have a low-fat diet, vegan diet, low glycemic index diet. Okay, so not things very high in sugar. It was a 22-week study, and then they had a 1-year follow-up. And let's see what they found. When they looked at HbA1c, they saw that the vegans, the blue line here, had a significant drop in the first 11 weeks, and then they continued to drop in HbA1c on week 22. Okay? omitting the animal products reverses diabetes. That's one of the major blood markers we look at, is HbA1c. Because HbA1c, when that further develops into things called advanced glycation end products, they turn into these really nasty things that bind to receptors all over your body and turn on inflammation. And not only do they turn on inflammation, they turn on free radical production. Anybody in here have joint issues, arthritis? Okay. Advanced glycation end products are a big contributor to that. They contribute to inflammation and joint problems. So if we look at their weight, we can see that the vegans had a substantial more drop in weight from week 0 to week 22, and then once they got to week 74, because they started looking into how further down the road to see if these people were maintaining their diets. Most of them did, and they saw that they had a slight increase in weight, but they had these wonderful benefits that they experienced, which I'll get to in a second. They also showed a decrease in LDL, low density lipids, right? So that's another marker we look at when we go to the doctor and we get our blood drawn. We look at LDLs to see what these transporters are doing in our blood. So you guys know what the difference between an LDL and an HDL is? You guys go to the doctors, right? And they say, oh, well, your LDL is high. And you're like, well, what the hell is that? What does that mean? What does it do? Right? So LDL is one of the transporters, the protein transporters that takes fat from your liver and distributes it across the body. So it deposits fat. Where HDL retrieves fat and it gets it out of muscle and it gets it out of the liver and it gets it out of other tissue and it removes it. So we see that the vegans had a substantial drop in low density lipids compared to the isocaloric individuals that were on a diet that consisted of meat and cheese and eggs. Okay, so we can see that there was a slight drop in the non-vegetarians, non-vegans, but that's because it was an isocaloric diet. So the registered dietitians that were working with them controlled portions, controlled calories, okay? And most importantly, most importantly is that the subjects that were vegan in this study, when they did the 1-year follow-up, lost 30 to 60 pounds over the course of a year. Stopped almost all diabetic medication. Okay? Brought their A1C down into an almost healthy range. And then lastly, reduced arthritis and reduced chronic pain. Okay? Get rid of the meat, get rid of the eggs, get rid of the cheese, reverse the disease. Another study, look at this one, 4 weeks. This is how quick this can happen. You get off that stuff for 4 weeks and you can have an immediate change, okay? This group, they basically looked at all these markers on what a vegetarian diet would do to blood markers. They looked at the weight, they looked at the BMI, they looked at total triacylglycerols, they looked at LDL, HDL, and then they looked at all these inflammatory markers down at the bottom here. And you can see that at baseline to the final stages, there were all these significant changes. The vegans dropped everything, their weight, their BMI, their triacylglycerols, their HbA1c, their low-density lipids, their high-density lipids, their VLDL, very low-density lipids. All these inflammatory markers here also dropped, and it looked like this. Let's take another look at this. That's the decrease in all of these markers in 4 weeks. Look at that. Beautiful thing. One more study. This was a vegetarian diet, and I put this one here just to show anyone that's thinking about going this route and changing their lifestyle and changing their diet, even if you want to go vegetarian, just as a transition period, right? Because I realize going vegan is a very hard thing, okay? Vegetarians, they were looking at 24-week study. They had a calorie-restricted diet, okay? These people increased insulin sensitivity just on a vegetarian diet, just by reducing meat consumption. Visceral fat decreased, okay? The visceral fat is the fat surrounding your organs, okay? We had improved concentrations of adipokines, okay? Which are a decrease in inflammatory cytokines that are secreted from the fat. And they also had reduced levels of oxidative stress. One thing you guys need to realize is that inflammation and oxidative stress, both of these things are highly associated with the development of cancer as well, okay? So anytime you can get down inflammation, you can get down oxidative stress, those are wonderful things, okay? But oxidative stress is really hard to measure in the body because it's an oxygen molecule that only has one electron, and it's looking to find other things to get stability. So it binds to the cellular membrane, it binds to enzymes in the body, and it just wants stability. So we can't measure oxidative stress, but we can measure oxidative stress-induced damage, okay? And we don't want to have oxidative stress-induced damage. So these individuals, let's look at the vegetarians are the solid black dot, and the normal diet is the open black dot. And you can see that weight, vegetarians, severe reduction. Waist circumference, vegetarians, severe reduction. LDL, reduced. Subcutaneous fat, look at that compared to the regular Western diet. Visceral fat decreased, and glucose sensitivity increased. In 4 weeks, the skeletal muscle became more sensitive to insulin, which then had a decrease in circulating levels of glucose. 4 weeks. And then I put these studies up here as well. These are just additional studies that I had found. 24-week study, 12-week study, 3-week study, 12-week study. Here's all the ages of all the participants. And you can see that the individuals that were on a vegan diet, again, same story, reduction in inflammation, reduction in oxidative stress, reduction in LDL, reduction in total triacylglycerols, increase in glucose sensitivity, increase in insulin action, increase in beta cell function, okay? All these things can reverse diabetes. So, do you want to stay on medication and continue down the medication route to help reverse diabetes? Because it won't. It'll slow it down. And as you get older, the concentration the prescription that they give you, they'll increase the concentration of your medicine just to try to slow it down more. So let's look and see what our options are. Okay, side effects associated with cholesterol, side effects associated with plant consumption. Let's take a look. Diarrhea, constipation, nausea, stomach cramps, muscle soreness, pain and weakness, vomiting, headaches, dizziness, drowsiness, fatigue, and these are the light symptoms, okay? Problems sleeping, rash, then you get into the serious complications, okay? Muscle damage, okay? Dark colored urine, liver damage, increased blood sugar, loss of memory. Let's look at the plants. More energy because you're controlling your blood glucose levels. Okay? Enhanced vitamin and mineral uptake. Feeling less of an urge to go eat horrible food, right? Because once you start seeing the effects of eating healthy, your body starts to change. You want to stay on that diet because you can see the changes immediately. Okay? Lighter, more satisfied because you're eating a lot more fiber. Bathroom time, less strenuous, right? You know what we call fiber in the medical world? Mother Nature's broomstick. So eat lots of fiber. Yeah. Effortless weight loss, okay? Improvements of biomarkers, which I just showed you. All those, I'm not making this up, this is science showing you, okay? So these are your options. Stay on the medication. Let the doctor tell you, oh, we'll just increase this. Oh, you got this, we'll give you another drug now to help aid with the side effect from the first drug. Or just get off all of it. Okay? So, now what we're starting to see is that a plant-based diet, you'll have less risk of heart disease, less risk of heart complications, less risk of hypertension, less risk of type 2 diabetes, and fewer intestinal distress orders, fewer metabolic disorders, okay? And then cancer, less indices of cancer, okay? Osteoporosis, kidney stones, all these things, they all go away. So, I'm gonna go back to this. I just showed you this a little bit ago, and I showed you how when we gain weight, it has an impact on all of these different tissues and all of these different systems, which makes diabetes very hard to detect, okay? And think about medication. If you have gut issues, and then you have vascular issues, and then you have liver issues, and then you have pancreas issues. Those are all different tissues, which means they require all different medications. Okay, medication is not a one-size-fits-all type of thing, all right? And yeah, so all of this stuff goes away. So key things to consider right now before we move into how we can make these changes. We want to omit or reduce animal consumption, which includes saturated fats, cholesterol. Okay, limit oils, whether plant-based or animal-based. Okay, I'm not saying don't eat oils. You have to have oils. You have to have some oil because every hormone in your body requires cholesterol and fat. Every cell in your body requires cholesterol and fat. Certain receptors in your body require cholesterol and fat. Okay, so you have to have some, but limit it. Low glycemic foods are very important, especially if you're already in a diabetic state. You got to keep exogenous blood sugar or exogenous glucose down. You don't want to deliver more glucose unnecessarily. And then exercise, exercise, exercise. Most importantly, is every study I just showed you guys, there was no exercise intervention. So some of those studies that took 11 weeks or 24 weeks or 4 weeks, they could have been accelerated with exercise. All right, so keep that in mind. If you're not exercising, you got to start doing it. Okay? So now, we're going to talk about the now. All right? What can we do today to start making these changes to avoid everything that we've been talking about? You might not want to consult your doctor. All right? A study in 2016 came out for physicians, not a study, but a reference manual to give to physicians to teach them how to speak with their patients about going on a plant-based diet. Because in med school, MDs don't get a lot of training in nutrition. I know in my school, they got about 3 weeks. And they were constantly coming into our laboratory saying, we don't know what these things are, can you help us out? And we were teaching them. Our group was teaching a lot of the endocrinologists on how these cells signal one another with animal products. This guide consists of these kind of step-by-step things for the doctor to talk to you about. They even says, hey, invite them in, create a warm scenario for them to sit down and start discussing their diet with you. A lot of MDs are catching on right now, but they're catching on. They haven't been trained in it. So if you want to seek help in this endeavor, you need to see a registered dietitian. You need to see somebody that went to school for this, that knows what they're talking about, because this is very specific. And if you don't do it right, it can be very dangerous. Okay? So keep that in mind. Very basic things that you guys can do. Today, eat whole foods, plants, and grains. Okay? Go to the grocery store, go to the produce section, and stay in the produce section. All right? Avoid animal products, such as meat, fish, and dairy. Okay? If that sounds like it's going to be a hard thing for you to do, then select a couple days out of the week and say, hey, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're not going to do animal products. Let's try it that way. Okay? Avoid processed and artificial foods. Okay? One of the reasons this country is experiencing this soy debacle that we're having, right? Because soy is this bad food. It isn't. It's what we do with soy that makes it bad. A lot of this processed food is filled with isolated isoforms of soy. Lots of nitrates and nitrites. Lots of sodium, lots of hidden fat, okay? Get away from these products as well, and then avoid anything with added fats and any sugar. These are things you can do today to start changing your life today. And that doesn't seem very hard, okay? Start now. First thing, keep in mind that we want our saturated fats to be about 10 to 15, our fat intake to be about 10 to 15% of our daily caloric calories. So 10 to 15%. So if I have 1,000 calories, what's 10% of 1,000? 100, all right? What does 100 calories of fat look like? 2 potatoes? Oh, yeah, probably. Yeah, I heard somebody say something about oil. Yeah, about a tablespoon of oil, right? It's about 120 calories, right? So you gotta limit it, okay? So if you have 2,000 calories a day, what's 10% of that? 200, right? So, okay, so that's 2 tablespoons of oil, all right? So limit your fat intake. And I'm gonna show you why I'm picking on fat in a second, especially for diabetes, okay? Cholesterol, reduce your cholesterol way below 300 milligrams a day. Okay, what's a milligram? What does that mean to me? I don't know, but I'm gonna show you guys how a milligram looks, okay? Plant-based protein. What is that? Are we getting enough protein in this country? I just showed you everything from 1960. Like we're diabolically eating too much protein in this country. And plants have protein. There's plenty of proteins in plants. I'm gonna show you guys just how much protein is in plants. Okay, so let's look at this. I said about 10 to 15, and for me, because I know the American Dietetics Association, they change their fat range every few years. So sometimes it's 15 to 20, sometimes it's 10. And then they say if it's 20 or if it's 30, you gotta have 10% of saturated, 10% of unsaturated, 10% of polyunsaturated. So it makes it very, very confusing, okay? So let's look at the percent of fat in these products. All right, cheese. 70% of calories from cheese comes from fat. And look at the division here. Look how much saturated fat's in that. More than half. Look at beef. 60% of its calories come from fat. Look at its saturated fat. Again, almost half. Okay? Eggs, same story. If you're gonna eat eggs, get rid of the yolk. That's a cholesterol bomb. All right? Milk, about 45% fat. All right, and as I told you guys earlier, low-fat milk isn't much different. Okay, and then you guys can look at the rest. Shrimp, chicken, right? You go down the line. So, let's look at cholesterol. I told you guys I want less than 300 milligrams a day. So let's look at the egg. You guys do the math for me. How many milligrams of cholesterol would be in 2 eggs? 400. Is that above or below what I told you guys to eat? So at breakfast, before you even leave the house, you're eating, if you have 2 eggs, not including the sausage, not including the bread, not including the butter you put on the bread, not including the glass of milk or the cream that you put in your coffee, before you even leave the house, you've exceeded your cholesterol for the day. Crazy, right? But that's how we eat here. Everyone tells us you gotta eat a hearty breakfast, you gotta eat eggs, you gotta eat milk, you drink your milk, you gotta have your sausage. Shrimp, veal. If we have, let's look at milk. It's about, what would you say, 35? Okay, so if you have 3 glasses of milk today, 3 glasses of milk, 8 ounces, getting close to that 300, okay? And these things compound throughout the day. So you guys, you gotta get below 300. Let's look at the calories from fat in plant-based food. What do you guys think of that? Drastically, where's the saturated fat? It's not there, it's gone, right? So fruit, lentils, barley, pasta, it's all absent of saturated fat, which is fantastic. And this is why I'm picking on fat. I'm gonna show you something now. So this is my world. This is what we investigate. Okay, so as a metabolic specialist, we look at intracellular signaling. So I'm gonna show you guys the best I can how the consumption of fat and cholesterol and saturated fat induces diabetes, okay? As we take in more fats, saturated cholesterol, even non-saturated fat, unsaturated fat, it all compiles. As we take in more of these fats, we get something in our body called dyslipidemia, or lipotoxicity, because it means that we have high levels of circulating fatty acids in the blood, okay? And what does that mean? Well, these fatty acids, hope you guys can see that. You guys see that? There we go, it's not showing. These fatty acids have to get into the cell through these transporters, okay? And that transporter is CD36. So that transporter regulates the uptake of fat into the cell. You see that CD36 there? Okay? Once fatty acids get into the cell, they can do a couple of things. They can increase the population of fatty acids in the cell. They can create triacylglycerols or triglycerides, right? So they can get put back into these complex fat molecules. They can make long-chain fatty acids, as you see right here. And then long-chain fatty acids can do one of two things. They can create these things called ceramides or DAG. DAG is diacylglycerol. And DAG and ceramides, they like to pick on the insulin pathway. So when these things become elevated in our cells, they start to shut off these two really important proteins that need to be phosphorylated in order to do their job. One of those proteins is right there, AKT. The other protein is IRS1. So when you have an abundance of fat in the cell, because you're taking it in through your diet, you start to shut off these proteins that are part of the insulin receptor complex. Do you guys see that right there? So that means when insulin comes along and it binds to that receptor cannot turn on because the proteins that are, we call it downstream, the proteins that are downstream can't be turned on. And if you look at all this mess here, right? This is what we're focused on right here. Is this, you see this the guy that says GLUT4? GLUT4 is the transporter that gets phosphorylated, it turns on, and it goes to the cell membrane, right there. And once it's at the cell membrane, it allows sugar to get into the cell. So, if you're eating a high level of fat, you're creating a lot of ceramides, a lot of diacylglycerols, then you are unintentionally shutting off the insulin pathway. And that is one of the mechanisms out of thousands. There's thousands of mechanisms that lead to insulin resistance. That's just one of them. And all these different mechanisms can compound one another. All right, so that's why I've been picking on saturated fat this whole time, is because I wanted to show you this one mechanism that stops insulin receptors from working right. And if the insulin receptors stop working right, then the beta cells say, hey, what's going on here? Sugar's not getting into the cell, so we're gonna just spew out a ton more insulin. And they call that compensatory hyperinsulinemia because the beta cells are compensating for high levels of glucose still being in the blood after insulin's been sent out, okay? So that's just one mechanism. For all of you that are vegan or all of you that are thinking about turning vegan, this is the question I get all the time when I am consulting with people. Where do you get your protein? Where do vegans get their protein? Okay. Where do the cows that we eat for protein get their protein? From plants, right? So we don't have to do this bioaccumulation thing where we eat the cows to get protein when they ate the plants to create the protein. Okay? Makes no sense. So, quick little comparison here. 20 grams of protein between two sources. Look at the beef, look at the white beans. 4 ounces of beef, 1/2 cup of white beans, 20 grams of protein. 290 calories versus 116 calories. 112 milligrams of cholesterol. What did I tell you guys to stay under? Right, so if you had those 2 eggs and then that, where are we at? Way above, right? How many cholesterol here? None. High in saturated fat, low in saturated fat. 0 grams of fiber, 7 grams of fiber. This guy here, carcinogenic. This guy over here, anti-carcinogenic. High in phytochemicals that are all anti-carcinogenic. Okay? New study just came, New study just came out of Yale, looking at blood supplies, looking at the blood of young vegan men. And it's one of the first studies to do this. And they looked at every single amino acid to say, hey, we got to really see if vegans are lacking these proteins and amino acids. You can see that in every category, whether essential or non-essential. These vegan men had way above the reference range on every single one, okay? If we look at leucine, 191 was the mean. They want between 184 and 199. They're in there, they're fine. They look at serine, 197. They want a reference range of 190 to 205, okay? They look at valine. The mean average was 217. They want between a 209 and 225. Okay, so what about the branch chain amino acids? Those are the really important ones because if you're in the weight room and you're trying to get your gains, right, the branch chain amino acids are the ones that are gonna help you get more muscle, right? Because so many people are, if I don't eat, if I don't eat animals, I won't have these big gains I want to get. So you can see here that isoleucine, leucine, and valine, all the branched chain amino acids, they were well into reference range. So these vegan men on a vegan diet had plenty of protein. And if you look at the percent of the recommended daily allowance, which is over here, every one of them, isoleucine, 191% above the recommended daily allowance. So this tells us they had plenty. They didn't have just enough, they had plenty of amino acids to make necessary protein during protein genesis, okay? So we don't have to worry about the protein. But I thought vegans were unhealthy, weak, and frail. Yes, if you don't do it right? If you don't manage your checkbook right, what's gonna happen to your finances? If you don't put gas in your car, when the light comes on, what's gonna happen? If you're trying to save for retirement and you're not keeping track of your investments, what's gonna happen? It's gonna fall apart. Same thing with your diet. Your diet needs just as much attention as your checkbook, making sure your kids are fed, making sure that your retirement money is where it needs to be, all right? If you look at Kendrick Ferris, vegan, won the 2014 Olympics in every weightlifting category out there, brought home a whole bunch of gold medals. He's doing it right? So what I'm trying to do with this section is kind of dispel any sort of disbelief you might have about the protein story, because it doesn't exist. And it doesn't exist because science is catching up to what the food industry has been trying to tell you guys for a very long time, okay? So, in closing, okay, I need you guys to go against the grain, okay? The government, the food industry, the FDA, they don't care about you. If they cared about you, they would tell you guys the right message. They would get rid of big farm companies and start investing more into farmers, okay? But it's business. Your health is business for them. You can't look at this and say, I'm trying a new diet. That's futile. You have to say, I'm trying a lifestyle modification. I'm gonna change my life. And I'm gonna do it by undoing the habits that I've carried with me my entire life, okay? The inconsistencies that I see every time I go to a bookstore and there's a table that says diet, right? And then you have the high grain power cookbook right next to the grain, don't eat grain cookbook. And then you have the paleo diet telling you to eat this way. And you have the Atkins diet. Stay away from all that. If you guys want accuracy, you have to go to a PubMed type of website to find the right information, okay? Because when you look at these publications that are coming out by universities and hospitals, it's science-based, okay? It's not opinion-based. Healthy eating, clean eating, all of these things that you see that's constantly being advertised, be very leery of it, okay? Again, do your research. The more you know, the more power you'll have to see what's snake oil and what's legit, okay? And then, in closing, I have this strand of DNA up here, and I have this light switch here, because we are starting to see that everything we eat, to a molecular level, we are what we eat, all right? If you're bringing in junk, you're altering the genome in a negative way, which is leading to diseases, which is leading to cancer, okay? If you're bringing in healthy food, you're changing the genome in a better way, okay? On a molecular level, everything that we eat is leading us to these diseases, and I've already said these to you guys. The Western diet is inducing this in our genes, okay? So, I'm gonna leave you guys with this. The greatest fight is when you are fighting in the smoke and you cannot see with your eyes. That is the fight that we are having right now for our health, against the food industry, against the pharmaceutical companies, even against modern medicine. we are having this fight where we are constantly confused because there has been a veil placed over our eyes and we cannot see what the truth is because nutritional science hasn't been taught to us. Okay? So I urge you to read as much as you can. I urge you to get on these publications, PubMed, and start reading things. I urge you to download podcasts and listen to them. I urge you to get on YouTube and start looking at information there, okay? As much information as you can gather, you need to do it. Because if you have children, if you have families, the information that you get is going to trickle down to them, okay? One of the things I don't agree with when it comes to medication is when you go and get that bottle from the pharmacist, it only has your name on it. When you make a change like this and you start bringing home the right food and you start cooking and you start reading and you start getting your kids to eat healthier, then that bottle has everybody's name on it, because then it's going to change your kids. It's going to change their kids. Okay? Any questions? I'll take them now. Thank you guys for listening, and I'll take any questions you guys might have. Thank you. Yes. 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 Yes.
Okay. Hello.
Hi.
Okay, all right. So what happened is that I talked to a nutritionist outside of the regular health carriers that I go to in Minnesota. Anyway, so what happened is that he said, oh, well, you need to do a ketogenic diet.
Yes.
And so that's what I did.
Yes.
But I put myself through hell because I didn't know all the things that I should have known. And I went for the water thing, through the Chinese thing, and for the fiber and all this. But I got it, when it down, I got it to do.
Yes.
But when I went back to the nutritionist, and I went in for a stress test to make sure I wasn't doing over with my exercise at LA Fitness. And so they said, oh, you can go 145 beats a minute with no problems. You know. But I have not been a plant-based diet person, okay? And so, but the problem is that when I went back to the nutritionist, and then she said, because I was doing low carbohydrate.
Yep.
And, okay, so what happens is that you can't go to a regular nutritionist.
Yeah.
When you said you could go to a nutritionist, it didn't work for me.
So what was your HbA1c when you went initially?
What?
What was your HbA1c level when you went to see them initially? You said your HbA1c was high?
It was going up. It was going up. I don't remember now exactly, but it was up. It was past being.
Okay, so the ketogenic diet is now being looked at in research as a viable option to reduce and reverse diabetes temporarily. Now, HbA1c is only one marker to suggest that diabetes might be present. Okay, they also have to look at other parameters like your triglycerols, like your blood glucose levels, like your insulin levels. You should do an oral glucose tolerance test to see what your insulin's doing over the course of 2 hours. If you didn't have any of those tests done, then it's really hard to say, well, your HbA1c is high, therefore, let's put you on a ketogenic diet. That's not a very thorough analysis. And if you exercise, if you're exercising a lot, let me show you guys something really quick, just to kind of support this exercise thing a little more. Okay, so let's imagine this is skeletal muscle, okay? I told you guys that this GLUT4 thing, oh, this thing is just not working with me right now. Okay, you guys all see the GLUT4 in the right over there? Okay, wonderful thing happens when you exercise. Exercise releases a tremendous amount of calcium into the muscle cell, right? Because calcium is responsible for making contraction happen. Longer you exercise, the more calcium's circulating in the cell. This guy here, GLUT4, he has another mechanism that makes him go to the membrane to bring in sugar, and that's calcium. So the higher the calcium in the muscle because of contraction, the more that GLUT4 will go up and bring sugar into the cell, which means exercise by itself will reduce circulating levels of glucose. You don't need insulin. It does it independently of insulin. So if you're exercising, that alone, if you're doing it long term, should reduce HbA1c. Now, HbA1c is a 3-month It signifies 3 months of glycated albumin. So it shows us how much protein in the blood has been glycated by sugar. So a ketogenic diet is going to basically create ketones, which is a surrogate for sugar, right? That's why they're saying, okay, don't take in any, do a low carbohydrate.
2 more minutes.
2 more minutes, okay. Do a low carbohydrate meal, get on a ketogenic diet, and then that way exercise with it, and that way you can reduce endogenous glucose levels and not take in any through diet, right? That's why they put you on a ketogenic diet. Now, the only people we see ketosis in is diabetics. Okay, so people that are getting on a ketogenic diet just to lose weight is a horrible thing to do because it basically tells us that metabolic derangement is occurring. And if you want to talk more about this afterwards, you and I can meet and talk a little bit. I can hear about what you had done and maybe give you some suggestions